You would never imagine that Mark, the invincible young hero who since Season 1 had steadfastly upheld the code of subduing villains without ever killing them, would, in the very opening of Season 4, personally shatter the principle he had guarded his entire life, literally smashing an innocent bystander's head to pieces with a single punch. The story begins in the aftermath of the Invincible War and the brutal battle against Conquest. Earth had been left battered and scarred by successive alien invasions. Once thriving cities lay in ruins. Although Mark had ultimately defeated the villains, he found himself plunged into an unprecedented emotional abyss. He shouldered the blame for every casualty and every act of destruction wrought by the war. The moment his physical wounds had healed, he threw himself into the wreckage day and night, working tirelessly to help rebuild the city. Yet, even with his ceaseless efforts, the chaos on Earth never ceased. A motley crew of minor villains, sensing Earth's weakened state, crawled out of the woodwork to stir up trouble. A high-speed mimic of the Flash, capable of generating lightning, a colossal anti-Hulk armored suit, possessing limitless strength, and a fire-breathing three-eyed insectoid monster, capable of slicing through steel like butter. Not a day went by without some new crisis erupting somewhere. To help alleviate the pressure on Mark, his younger brother Oliver officially joined the ranks of Earth's heroes. His girlfriend Eve, along with the newly reconstituted Global Guardians, also stood guard over the planet. Even with this support, however, Mark remained trapped in an endless cycle of grinding, battling villains day in and day out, without even a moment to catch his breath. Oliver, who had previously begged and pleaded with Mark to take him along on missions, had finally reached his breaking point after months of working around the clock. When Mark received word that the villain Furnace had escaped prison and called upon Oliver to join him on the mission, Oliver flatly refused. All he wanted was to go home, play some video games, and get some sleep. He simply couldn't face continuing this thankless, never-ending grind any longer. The two brothers nearly came to blows, but their mother, Debbie, stepped in to intervene, urging them to take a night off to rest. Mark, however, insisted that he had no right to rest. The eyes of the people outside, the people he was sworn to protect, were filled with nothing but suspicion and rage directed at him. The world had been reduced to this state because of him. He simply could not stop. So I don't get to be tired. Meanwhile, over at the Global Defense Agency, Cecil was busy reorganizing the Guardians of the Globe. He gathered Rex, Captain Britain, and the rest of the team, aiming to formally reinstate them, not merely to band together to protect the Earth, but to prove to the entire world that despite enduring so many disasters, the Guardians still stand. However, the team members had long since lost their trust in Cecil. After all, he had previously committed numerous unethical acts in his efforts to keep Mark in check. Life continued in this chaotic whirlwind until Mark received a fake distress call, an incident that completely tore open a deep wound in his psyche. He rushed to the scene, only to find no one in need of rescue. Instead, a mysterious figure emerged from the shadows to tell him that his post-disaster reconstruction efforts were entirely misguided. The figure argued that humanity was a plague upon the Earth, and that only a mass reduction in population would allow the planet to heal itself. Before Mark could fully process this, a red-skinned dinosaur-like creature charged out, slamming into him and sending him flying. The creature babbled incessantly in his ear, claiming that Mark's efforts to save a mere few thousand people would ultimately cost tens of thousands their jobs, and that accelerating global warming would only result in even greater devastation. Looks like he picked the wrong fight. Come on. This dinosaur man looked menacing, but his actual combat prowess was laughably weak. Mark knocked him flying with a single punch. Yet the moment he was struck, the dinosaur man instantly transformed into an unarmed, ordinary human being. Lying on the ground, he pleaded with Mark for help, claiming he had been mind-controlled and was acting completely against his own will. But this time, Mark did not hold back as he had in the past. Instead, he reached out and clamped his hand tightly around the man's throat, the murderous rage in his eyes, now utterly impossible to conceal. The timely arrival of the Guardians of the Globe prevented Mark from committing an irreversible act. Yet, everyone present could see it clearly. The young hero known as Invincible, who had always steadfastly upheld a no-kill principle, was no longer the same. The moral line he had drawn in his heart had suffered a fracture, a rift that could never be fully mended. Mark, is everything all right? Debbie, what do you think? Mark was meeting Debbie's parents for the first time, and the atmosphere was excruciatingly awkward. After all, the company where Debbie's father had worked was the very same one Mark had personally demolished during a previous battle, leaving her father, quite literally, unemployed. After the meal, Eve's father called Mark outside. Far from giving him a hard time, he instead spoke to him with absolute candor. He thanked Mark for his patience and tolerance toward Eve, then revealed a stark truth. Since she had started seeing him, Eve had already died, frozen solid on 2 separate occasions. Both times, it was entirely because of him. He told Mark that if he truly loved Eve, he could no longer be the cause of her suffering. Love is never just an empty word. It entails both responsibility and restraint. These words struck Mark's heart like a heavy hammer. He confessed to Eve that earlier that day, when they encountered the dinosaur man, his very first impulse had been to kill him. He had even begun to wonder if by simply eliminating these villains, he could save a greater number of innocent lives. Fortunately, Eve's comforting presence allowed his tightly wound nerves to temporarily relax. Yet, unbeknownst to them, a far greater catastrophe was already brewing in the shadows. Alright, okay. We're getting deep within the city's sewer system. 2 maintenance workers investigating a pipe blockage were suddenly ambushed and parasitized by a lurking squid dog. This particular squid dog, which had secretly infiltrated Earth some months prior, had leveraged its astonishing reproductive capabilities to build an entire army within the sewers in a mere matter of months. Countless humans had already been parasitized, transformed into mindless puppets under its control. It's time. Meanwhile, on the other side of the globe, the Cosmic Queen made her dramatic debut. Wielding a scepter capable of voraciously absorbing ambient energy, she pursued a singular objective: to save her home planet, which teetered on the brink of total annihilation. She immediately set her sights on Earth's nuclear power plants. By draining their energy reserves dry, she believed she could save her people. She stormed into a power plant, slaughtered every guard in her path, and forced the staff to push the reactor's output to its absolute maximum. If this continued, not only would the power grid across half the coastline collapse, but the reactor itself would suffer a catastrophic meltdown. Upon receiving the alert, Mark and Eve raced to the power plant without a moment's delay. At first, Mark attempted to reason with the Queen, even offering to help her resolve the crisis facing her home world. But the Queen refused to listen. For the sake of her people, she was determined to bleed Earth's energy dry. With no common ground to be found, the two immediately clashed. The Queen's scepter proved incredibly potent, unleashing powerful laser blasts that, for a time, pinned Mark down and left him completely overwhelmed. What the hell? Eve's superpowers suddenly failed. The energy weapon she intended to form instantly dissolved into a puddle of liquid. Just as the Queen was about to strike Eve, Mark rushed forward to shield her, taking the full force of the laser blast head on. I've heard that before. Seizing the opportunity, he charged in and snatched the Queen's scepter. However, he hadn't anticipated that the scepter was bound to its master. It unleashed a massive surge of energy that knocked Mark unconscious. The instant the Queen let her guard down, Eve rushed in and smashed a vial of acetaldehyde directly into her face. The Cosmic Queen, who moments ago had been strutting about so arrogantly, was instantly knocked out cold. No sooner had Mark and Eve finished dealing with the Cosmic Queen than Cecil burst through a portal, bringing with him even more dire news. The army of squids, taking advantage of the fact that everyone's attention was focused on the nuclear power plant, had launched a full-scale invasion of the city. Fortunately, the Global Defense Agency had a contingency plan in place. They swiftly raised an isolation barrier, trapping the squids within the city limits. However, the barrier was merely experimental and wouldn't hold for long. Even worse, if a single infected host managed to escape the barrier, the squids would instantly sweep across the globe, leaving no hope for recovery. Mark immediately teleported to the battlefield. Every member of the Global Guardians was equipped with a neural disruptor, devices capable of stunning squids within a 3-meter radius, forcing them to detach from their hosts so the civilians could be teleported to safety. Yet the sheer number of squids was overwhelming. They swarmed in by the thousands, rendering the Guardians' equipment largely ineffective. One by one, the team members were overwhelmed. Their armor was shattered, their disruptors were torn away, Beast Girl was directly infected and brought under their control, and even the robots were completely engulfed by the horde of squids. The integrity of the barrier had dropped to a mere 4% and was on the verge of collapse. Only one infected host remained within the entire city. Every surviving squid had converged around him, while the entire Guardian team lay trapped and disarmed. Mark II was pinned down in midair by countless squids, unable to break free from their suffocating grip. The moment the barrier shattered, the squids would instantly spread across the entire world. Billions billions of people would be infected, and Earth would fall completely under the dominion of the squids. Ha ha ha! It was in that very instant that Mark made the decision that would change his life forever. "I'm sorry." Under the gaze of everyone present, he uttered those words of apology. Then, with a single punch, smashed in the head of that innocent man. This was not a descent into depravity, but rather a true coming of age. True guardianship is never about clinging to a naive moral purity. It is about being willing to personally shoulder the burden of sin in exchange for the survival of billions. While others celebrated their birthdays with cakes and gifts, Nolan's rite of passage into adulthood was met with nothing but a life-and-death struggle, a brutal trial orchestrated jointly by his own biological parents. Only by surviving this onslaught of parental power could he truly earn the title of a full-fledged Viltrumite adult. The story begins during the Viltrumite Empire's most glorious golden age, a time when the Viltrumites, relying on their unrivaled physical prowess, had conquered the vast majority of races across the cosmos, leaving the entire galaxy prostrate beneath their feet. In his youth, Nolan served as an instructor within the Viltrumite military barracks, spending his days instilling in the younger generation the philosophy of survival of the fittest, alongside the ruling ideology of the late Emperor Argal. Even routine training sessions were governed by ruthless rules of elimination. Those too weak to survive were deemed unworthy of the very identity of a Viltrumite. Nolan's own rite of passage laid bare, in its most extreme form, the savagery that was etched into the very bones of the Viltrumite Empire. Faced with a battle to the death initiated by his own parents, Nolan struck back without a shred of mercy. For him, all familial bonds served merely as stepping stones on the path to his own ascendancy. His biological parents were nothing more than obstacles to be surmounted on his journey to becoming a true powerhouse. Though left battered and bruised by the ordeal, Nolan ultimately scraped through the trial. He claimed his own official uniform and received the very first combat assignment of his life. Yet neither he nor any of the other newly minted Viltrumite warriors realized that a catastrophe capable of wiping out their entire race had already descended upon them in silence. A device, disguised as an asteroid, breached the atmosphere of Viltrum, disintegrating into countless fragments high above the planet. It scattered across every corner of the globe, slowly beginning to release a green toxic gas, engineered specifically to target Viltrumite DNA. First, the warriors in the barracks, fresh from completing their rites of passage, began to collapse one after another, coughing up blood as they met their deaths. Soon, symptoms began to manifest among Viltrumites across the entire planet. Bleeding from every orifice, they perished in agony on the streets. The High Command swiftly identified the source of the gas, christening this biological weapon the Heaven's Scourge virus. Yet even for the Viltrumites, a civilization possessing technology at the absolute pinnacle of sophistication, no cure or treatment for the virus could ever be found. Once a flourishing empire, it was ultimately reduced to fewer than 50 pure-blooded Viltrumites. More devastating still, the surviving members of the race had lost the ability to reproduce naturally. Inbreeding would only hasten the degeneration of their species' capabilities, leading to their eventual total extinction within the cosmos. This cataclysm claimed the lives of billions of Viltrumites, their corpses piled high, forming a ring of debris that encircled their home planet. The scene shifts to the present. Nolan accompanies Alan to the headquarters of the Coalition of Planets, where he meets the man the Viltrumites brand a traitor, Thaddeus. Thaddeus was the first to rise up against the Viltrumite Empire's rule. It was he who personally assassinated the former Emperor Argal, an act that triggered the Viltrumite Empire's Great Purge. Upon learning that fewer than 50 pure-blooded Viltrumites remained, Thaddeus too wore an expression of profound shock. It was here that Nolan finally revealed the true objective behind his original mission to Earth. His journey to that planet had never been solely about conquest. Rather, it was a quest to identify a species genetically compatible with the Viltrumites, a means to ensure the survival of his own endangered race. The fact that Mark had perfectly inherited his abilities served as irrefutable proof that humans were indeed the ideal partners for procreation. Nolan agreed to assist the Coalition of Planets in gathering every weapon capable of posing a threat to the Viltrumites, on one sole condition: Mark was not to be dragged into this conflict. Shortly thereafter, Nolan, accompanied by Alan and his wife, boarded the Adventure and embarked upon their quest to locate these weapons. This journey marks the beginning of Nolan's complete severance from his past, the first step toward his own redemption. The first destination on their itinerary was a radiation gun concealed deep within an asteroid belt. The weapon's beam possessed the power to effortlessly pierce through a Viltrumite's body. Indeed, it was Nolan himself who years ago had buried both the weapon and its wielder, a space knight, beneath thousands of tons of rock. Yet when Nolan and Alan finally excavated the site, they made a startling discovery. The space knight, entombed for a century, was still alive. Without a word of warning, the knight launched an immediate assault, his eyes burning with the accumulated hatred of 100 years of imprisonment. Just as tensions reached a breaking point, Nolan stepped forward and, facing the very victim of his past atrocities, uttered a long overdue apology. In the past, Nolan's vision was focused solely on the Viltrumite Empire's mission of conquest, regarding the lives of other races as utterly worthless. Yet now, those very lives have truly become his most powerful weapon. Ultimately moved by Nolan's transformation, the Space Knights agreed to join the Planetary Coalition in a united stand against the Viltrumite Empire. During the journey that followed, Nolan led the group to locate the new Rak Beetles, creatures containing a compound capable of rendering the Viltrumites' otherwise invulnerable bodies fragile and vulnerable, much like kryptonite affects Superman. These beetles were, in fact, a detail Nolan had inadvertently overlooked years ago while carrying out a planetary cleansing mission. He then traveled to the homeworld of the Gildadarians, a race whose technological prowess, even at its zenith, had once given pause to the Viltrumites themselves. Years ago, Nolan had hired other races to launch an assault against them, inflicting a devastating toll upon their people. This time, however, Nolan offered them his most sincere and heartfelt apologies. They also sought out the War Beasts, creatures capable of standing against the Viltrumites, but found only clues suggesting that these beasts were currently roaming the cosmos, honing their skills amidst a trail of blood and fire. The most perilous incident of the entire journey occurred on the planet inhabited by the Ragnar, creatures that even the Viltrumites feared to their very core. Years ago, in order to keep these monsters in check, Nolan had commissioned the construction of a massive solar shield to block out the light of the star, thereby ensuring the Ragnar remained perpetually frozen within the planet's glaciers. On this return visit, Nolan had intended merely to shift the shield slightly to capture a few specimens before departing. However, the ship's captain misunderstood his instructions and instead fired a missile that completely obliterated the entire solar shield. With the shield's protection gone, the glaciers melted rapidly, and thousands of Ragnar burst forth from the ice. Possessing formidable leaping abilities and razor-sharp claws, the Ragnar could effortlessly tear through a Viltrumite's body. Nolan and his companion were instantly plunged into a desperate struggle, left with no opportunity even to attempt an escape. Just as the pair faced certain death, Thraxa forcibly seized command of the spaceship and maneuvered it to once again block the light of the star. The temperature on the planet's surface plummeted. The newly awakened Ragnar were frozen solid once more, allowing Nolan and his companion to narrowly escape with their lives. This harrowing, near-fatal journey compelled Nolan to undertake a profound re-evaluation of his past. He finally realized that the mission the Viltrumites constantly touted, to bring order to the universe, was nothing more than a flimsy pretext to satisfy their insatiable lust for conquest. All they had ever brought to countless races was destruction and death. The catastrophe unleashed by the Scourge virus was merely the bitter fruit of the seeds of malice they themselves had sown. Upon returning to the Planetary Alliance, Cades took Nolan aside and led him into a clandestine laboratory. There, Cades finally confessed his greatest sin to Nolan. He was the creator of the Scourge virus. It was he who years ago had unleashed the virus upon the Viltrumite homeworld, causing the horrific deaths of billions of his own people. Nolan erupted in instant fury, his hands clamping down tightly around Cades' throat. Yet Cades offered not the slightest resistance. Indeed, he was willing, even eager, to let Nolan kill him, offering his own life as atonement. "If you feel I deserve to die, then strike. I would not blame you." He explained to Nolan that he had originally assassinated Emperor Argal in the hope of halting his people's brutal campaign of conquest. However, to his horror, his people only intensified their aggression. Left with no other recourse, he had created the Scourge virus. There is no such thing as absolute good or absolute evil. Cades was a hero who rebelled against tyranny, yet also the butcher, responsible for the slaughter of billions of lives. The Viltrumites were predators in the cosmic arena, yet also victims of the near extinction of their own mother world. Depending on one's perspective, the very definitions of good and evil can be completely inverted. Nolan finally steeled his resolve. Turning away, he set out on the path back to Earth to retrieve his son, Mark. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, the Conqueror, having fled Earth, finally stood in the presence of the Regent, Thrag. The mightiest Viltrumite warrior in the universe had finally made his appearance, a moment signifying that this war, now engulfing the entire galaxy, had passed the point of no return.